This chilling tale unfolds in the UK, spanning several years, and centers around a man whose name you've likely never heard, David Wilson. Though he may not be a household name, David Wilson is, without a doubt, one of the most prolific and sinister criminals I've ever featured on this channel. His story is one of manipulation, exploitation, and unspeakable evil. David Wilson was a 36-year-old man living in the city of Norfolk, England. Not much is widely known about his early life, but what I've uncovered paints a disturbing picture. He worked as a roofer to make ends meet, a seemingly ordinary job for an ordinary man. But there was something far from ordinary about David. He was also involved in children's football, a detail that becomes increasingly unsettling as this story unfolds. Adding to the intrigue, David still lived with his mother in a property she owned. On the surface, he appeared to be an unremarkable man. But beneath that facade, David harbored a horrifying secret, a secret that would finally come to light in 2020. David Wilson was a predator. He wielded the power of the internet like a weapon, manipulating young and vulnerable individuals into sending him illegal and explicit images of themselves. From 2016 to 2020, David perfected a sinister tactic to achieve his twisted goals. He created numerous fake profiles on various social media platforms, profiles designed to deceive. These were what's known as catfish accounts, where someone pretends to be someone they're not. David's catfish profiles featured images of teenage girls, carefully crafted to appear as authentic as possible. He didn't just stop at a profile picture. He created entire fake personas, complete with backstories and details to make them believable. To further his anonymity, David purchased used prepaid mobile phones, using a different device for each victim. He knew exactly how to exploit the vulnerabilities of his targets. He understood that a young boy would be flattered and intrigued if a teenage girl messaged him on social media. He counted on the fact that they wouldn't think clearly if the account seemed genuine. But David didn't just target anyone. He specifically sought out boys young enough to fall for this trap, typically between the ages of 11 and 15. His approach was calculated. He would start with casual messages, gradually building a rapport. Over time, the conversations would turn flirtatious, then sexual. David would shower the boys with compliments, making them feel special and safe. Once he had their trust, he would make his first request: a naked image or a photo of a specific part of their body. To further manipulate them, David would sometimes send an image first, using photos of teenage girls he had found online, to create a false sense of trust. The victims, too young and naive to fully grasp the gravity of the situation, often complied. They would send David the photos he demanded, unaware of the nightmare that was about to unfold. But David didn't stop there. He would escalate his demands, asking for more and more explicit images. With each photo, he gained more power over his victims. He now had compromising images the boys would never want their parents, friends, or anyone else to see. David used this leverage to blackmail them, threatening to leak the photos if they didn't comply with his demands. For a young boy, the thought of such exposure was catastrophic. But David's depravity didn't end with blackmail. He made increasingly horrific requests, forcing his victims to send even more extreme imagery. And if a victim happened to have a younger sibling, which was sometimes the case, David would demand the unthinkable. He would coerce the victim into committing acts against their own siblings, documenting them, and sending the evidence back to him. David repeated this cycle over and over, exploiting children under the age of 15 for his own twisted pleasure. The majority of his victims were between 11 and 15 years old, but some were even younger. All of them were contacted through social media. And here's the part that truly made my stomach churn. The youngest victim in this case was just 4 years old. David was meticulous in his methods. At any given time, he maintained around 15 fake social media accounts and used 5 different prepaid mobile phones. This level of anonymity made it difficult for victims to report him to the police, even if they dared to come forward. David was prolific, his depraved obsession consuming his life. He was skilled at covering his tracks, leaving little evidence behind. The toll on his victims was devastating. Many begged him to stop, their mental health crumbling under the weight of his threats. Depression, anxiety, and overwhelming fear became their constant companions. Some even expressed suicidal thoughts, telling David how scared they were, how much they wanted it all to end. But David showed no mercy. He continued to pressure them, indifferent to the trauma he was inflicting. This nightmare persisted from 2016 to 2020, during which David victimized hundreds of young boys. Their stories are harrowing, and I'll touch on some of them soon. But before I do, there's something you need to know, something that will likely fill you with anger. Despite his heinous crimes, the police were well aware of David Wilson. Yet for years, he continued to prey on hundreds of innocent lives. 4th of April 2015, a day that marked the first crack in David Wilson's dark facade. On this day, David was arrested. The reason? Possession of indecent images. Officers carried out a search of the property where he lived at the time, and an investigation was launched. But here's the chilling part. Despite their efforts, not enough evidence was collected to bring David to justice. This was a man who knew how to cover his tracks, how to slip through the cracks. With insufficient evidence to link him to the crimes, the police took no further action. However, due to the nature of the accusations, David's employers and the football association he worked for were informed. The police had grown concerned about his involvement in children's football, and from what I can gather, his work with the football team was halted. But David? He walked free. Free to continue his disturbing reign of terror. Though the police were now aware of him, their monitoring of David remains unclear. How closely was he being watched? We don't know for sure. But one thing is certain. This brush with the law didn't deter David in the slightest. If anything, it only emboldened him. Now let's talk about the National Crime Agency, NCA, the UK's lead agency against organised crime, human trafficking, weapon trafficking, and cybercrime. By 2016, David is believed to have begun the horrifying scheme I described earlier, using catfish accounts to message young boys. But here's where technology stepped in. Facebook, the social media giant, uses an algorithm to scan messages sent on its platform. According to the head of the NCA, this algorithm can detect suspicious behavior, identify what's being sent, by whom, and even determine their age. In 2017, David's fake profiles were flagged. Facebook shared this data with the NCA, revealing 20 accounts of boys sending indecent images of themselves to what they believed was a teenage girl's account. This was the break investigators needed. A new investigation was launched. They traced the IP addresses used in these crimes back to the property owned by David's mother. Then, they found CCTV footage of David purchasing a top-up voucher for a mobile phone linked to one of his fake accounts. In August 2017, the NCA arrested David. During the raid, they found a mobile phone hidden in his bedroom, a phone used to commit some of these crimes. But once again, David was released. This arrest didn't stop him, not even close. David continued his spree, destroying the lives of hundreds of boys. He was arrested again in January 2018 after being flagged once more, but yet again, he was released. And just like before, the moment he walked out of police custody, he resumed his crimes. Investigators later explained that they had to be patient. They wanted to dig deeper into David's Snapchat, Google, and Instagram accounts to gather as much evidence as possible. At the time, they didn't realize just how prolific David truly was. The investigation hit another hurdle. UK investigators had to file an international letter of request to US authorities to access more data. It took nearly 2 years for the NCA to receive this information, but when they did, the gravity of the situation became clear. They weren't just dealing with a predator. They were dealing with one of the most prolific cybercriminals in British legal history. Finally, in April 2020, the police had the evidence they needed to make a proper arrest. But David wasn't going down without a fight. As the police approached his property, David realized what was happening. In a desperate last-ditch effort to destroy evidence, he tried to flush his mobile phone down the toilet. It was a futile attempt. David was arrested for the 3rd time during this 3-year investigation. But here's the infuriating part. Each time he was released, he reoffended. Questions arose about why David was able to evade justice for so long, leaving a trail of shattered lives in his wake. An NCA spokesperson explained that they weren't in a position to charge him before 2020. They said, "We applied bail conditions, but we can't be with them 24 hours a day." Wilson was really determined. We did as much as we could. When you're dealing with someone who has used fake identification, we have to be 100% certain that the person we arrest and charge is the one behind these fake identities. It takes time. It's like piecing together a jigsaw puzzle until you can prove the links. The evidence gathered was overwhelming. Investigators had to sift through more than 250,000 messages and a vast number of disturbing images. The sheer volume of what they had to examine is unimaginable. It was discovered that David's victims weren't just in the UK. They were spread across the globe, from the US to Australia. He had attempted to contact 5,000 people and succeeded with 500. In November 2020, David Wilson stood in Ipswich Crown Court and admitted to 96 offences. The trial was straightforward after his confession, but the victim's statements brought the true horror of his crimes to light. One victim, who was just 11 years old when David contacted him, shared his story. He described feeling frightened and trapped in David's evil game. "This girl approached me in a way that seemed normal," he said. "She seemed like an approachable person my age. It was believable for me to think this was just a normal girl I found attractive. So, I kept talking to her. Images were sent. Over time, David began to threaten and harass him, leaving scars that would last a lifetime." One victim, his voice trembling, recounted how David threatened to post explicit images of him everywhere, to his parents, his peers, to the world. "He took advantage of my youth and my innocence," the victim said. "He just wanted more and more indecent images for his own satisfaction." The weight of his words hung heavy in the air. Then, the victim's mother took the stand. Tears streamed down her face as she addressed the judge. "I failed to protect my child from the monster who preyed upon him," she said, her voice breaking. "I was unable to keep him safe." Her anguish was palpable, a stark reminder of the devastation David had wrought. More victims came forward, each story more harrowing than the last. One young boy, already grappling with the trauma of losing his father to cancer, was groomed by David during this vulnerable time. The victim explained how his life was already falling apart. But David didn't care. He exploited the boy's pain, pushing him into a spiral of deep depression. "My life was already falling apart," the victim said, "but David wanted the images more than he cared about my well-being." Another brave victim stepped forward, recounting how David targeted him while he was mourning the loss of his grandfather. The two had chatted on a fake account, the conversation starting innocently before turning flirtatious. The victim sent an image, and the blackmail began. He begged David to stop, explaining that his grandfather had just died and that the threats were making an already difficult time unbearable. But David showed no mercy. He had no interest in the boy's sorrow. He pressed on, demanding more explicit material, indifferent to the pain he was causing. Then, a victim stood tall and looked directly at David. "Do you remember me?" he asked. "I was the little boy who used to play striker. I was 9, and I was a top scorer. I was the kid you took advantage of, the kid you blackmailed, the kid you made feel depressed. I am the kid whose childhood you stole." His words echoed through the courtroom, a powerful testament to the lives David had ruined. The court also heard how David, on multiple occasions, forced some of his victims to commit unthinkable acts against their own siblings. The details were so horrifying that even the seasoned courtroom professionals were shaken. Because David had admitted to his crimes, a full trial was avoided, but the damage he had done was undeniable. One investigator who worked on the case described David's behavior as almost compulsive. "I really think he couldn't help himself," the investigator said. "It's like some sort of mental illness. It developed over time and became progressively worse. Offenders like him often need to escalate their actions to gain the same stimulus, much like drugs. He became more and more dangerous in terms of his offending." The sentencing judge, Judge Overbury, didn't mince words. He described David as a serial predator and an extremely dangerous individual. Looking directly at David, the judge said, "You carried out a lengthy and premeditated campaign of sadistic manipulation. Any decent human being will be astonished at the level of depravity involved." The full extent of what David forced his victims to do remains unclear. Sources don't provide specific details, and perhaps it's for the best. Some things are too horrifying to know. But one thing is certain: whatever it was beyond extreme. When it came to sentencing, the court considered one final detail: David had expressed a willingness to work with agencies while in custody to address his problems. Whether someone like David is capable of rehabilitation is debatable, but the court took it into account. On the 10th of February 2021, David Wilson was sentenced to 25 years in prison with an extended license period of 8 years. In the UK, where sentences can often seem lenient, 25 years is a significant term, one usually reserved for the most heinous crimes. Yet, many believe it's not enough. David is too dangerous, they argue, to ever be released. The investigators made a point to highlight the bravery of the victims. For many of them to come forward at such a young age, to relive their trauma in front of a courtroom, was nothing short of remarkable. The investigation and court proceedings were grueling, requiring the victims to recount deeply vulnerable and painful experiences. Following the sentencing, investigators described David as one of the most prolific offenders they had ever encountered. Imagine, for a moment, being young and trusting someone online, only to be met with horrific threats and blackmail. The thought is chilling. David showed no regard for his victims, no remorse, no empathy. This case left me feeling a mix of fury and sickness. The internet, for all its opportunities and advancements, also harbors dark corners where predators like David operate. He may be on the extreme end of such criminals, but he is far from rare. There are others like him, lurking in the shadows, waiting to exploit the vulnerable. David Wilson is now considered one of the most prolific criminals in British legal history. His victims are receiving treatment from mental health professionals, but for some, the scars may never heal. Those who were blackmailed into harming their siblings may never fully recover psychologically. This case is a stark reminder of the importance of internet safety, especially for children. While the digital age has brought countless benefits, it has also opened the door to predators like David Wilson. Let this story serve as a warning, a call to vigilance in a world where danger can hide behind a screen.